Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Today we're going to reupholster 6 pretty worn folding chairs. So all of these are practically threadbare and the chair itself is in excellent condition and the seat foam itself is in excellent condition, but the fabric is completely gone. So we're going to remove the screws off the top, but it's actually the bottom part that's a little bit trickier. So these ones actually have retainer clips, and there are a couple of different ways that you can go about removing these. But if you do damage them, you will need to buy some retainer clips for your seat cushion to actually be adhered to your folding chair. So taking out the screws is the easy part. This is pretty satisfying. And then this particular fabric was very threadbare. So you do want to wear a mask or do this where it's well ventilated because a lot of dust and fibers did start to release from this fabric. Next, we want to remove the fabric from the backing, and it has some staples in there, so I'm just using some pliers just to help release that. I can do this with my hands as well. You just want to make sure that you don't poke yourself with the staples. Okay, we're going to set that aside as well as the screws, and we're going to work on the seat. This time I'm going to use my hammer and I'm going to strike each one of those plastic clips. Now, the first time I did this, I did try to remove the seat from the chair, but these clips are so well secured that I ended up damaging the seat in the process, and I ended up damaging the clips even when I was just pulling it out, so that they were really hard to reuse. You can if you're careful. This was my first attempt, and you can see that it damaged the plywood, and then one of the clips actually just stayed inside, and I needed to use my pliers to pull it out from the top part of the chair, and at which point these clips can maybe be used again, but it was best just to buy new ones. And it was a little bit difficult to find them, so I'm going to share with you where you can find them, and you can find links to the materials that I used in the description box below. So I'm going to continue hammering these through because for this chair, I'm just going to use all new clips. I'm not going to try to salvage any of these. And also by doing this, you do protect the backing of the seat as well, because you can tear it and break it. This would be the plywood when you're trying to remove the clips if you don't just completely try to hammer them through. I'm removing the fabric once again. It has a lot of staples around the edges, so I'm just going to also remove any of the spare staples. They're quite rusted, so do be careful. And this was a pretty lengthy project, and I do have a breakdown of the cost and whether it was affordable or cost-effective to do this versus buying new chairs. So you can find that information in the description box below. Once I've removed the seat from the chair, I still need to remove these clips from the backing. And I've used my pliers to get them through. Sometimes you do need to hammer them through, but you can see the little bit of damage here. That's not enough damage to ruin the chair, but if it's any more than that, the clips might not stay in securely. So these are panel push retainers. You can find these in an auto supply store. So there were so many to choose from, and I chose the ones that most resembled the ones that I had, but they're not exactly the same, and you can tell that there's a little extra sort of top piece that's going to prevent this from laying completely flat. But of all the choices that I found at my local auto supply store, these were the best choice. If I had gotten ones that were flush at the top, I don't think that the peg portion would have been big enough for my chair. This is the fabric that I'm using. I like it a lot, but for this project, it was a little bit tricky to use, primarily because of the embroidery. Now, I want to make sure that I have at least about 1 inch to 1.5 inches clearance all the way up. You want to take into account the seat cushion itself, and you can use your old fabric as a template, but I opted just to lay my seat cushion down and then fold up the sides just so that I had enough clearance. Then I went ahead and I cut all 4 sides. I'm using a staple gun to adhere this, and my staples are 1/4 inch, which work just fine for the seat. If they were a 1/2 inch, then they were too long and they would poke through. And the 1/4 inch works well, but on some parts, if it is a little bit on the thinner side of the cushion, then it's possible that it could go all the way through. If there are smaller staples, you might consider that if your seat cushion is a little bit on the thinner side. So the fabric is completely fine with the staple gun, but not where the embroidery is. And I did not realize this at first. It took me a lot of trial and error to realize that the staple gun was not adhering through where there was embroidery. And if it did, it didn't go all the way through, or it just popped right out. So I did waste a lot of staples in sort of the trial and error of figuring this out. So now that the fabric is all the way around and you want it taut but not too tight, then I'm going to trim off the excess pieces that are around those 4 clips. You want them exposed and you don't want any bunches of fabric around it. Otherwise, they're not going to adhere well. So this is the fun part. You just want to make sure that you've positioned this correctly. The 2 front portions of my chair are a little bit rounded and the back portions are a little bit more squared off. And you can see that those pegs are just poking through. That's enough. It is secure, but I do want them to come through even more. And you can see that it's not going to pop up at all, but I want it a little bit more flush and tight. So I'm going to take my hammer and I'm just going to pound it through a little bit. And this is going to allow just a little bit more of that peg to come through the metal portion of my chair. And you can see here that it came in just a little bit more, and you can see that it's a bit more flush on one side, and this side I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. But because the retainers I'm using have maybe like a double top portion, if you really press firmly, you can feel it with your fingers, but otherwise you cannot tell when you're sitting. It's time to work on the back portion of the chair. I'm going to remove those excess staples, and now we're just going to fold over our fabric. Because this was the last of 6 chairs that I'm doing, I could be a little more generous with the fabric, but again, if it's too tight, you're going to see it sort of tight on the front portion, and if you have it too loose, then you're also going to see some ripples on the front. So you have to be just so when you are putting your fabric on the back portion and even on the seat portion, but the back portion especially. So that's all screwed on the back portion. You can see there's a little bit of rippling for the top portion, but at least for the seat, you can see how nice and taut it looks. It's very comfortable. Even with that embroidery, it's very comfortable. It's very classy. And I like that we were able to upcycle these chairs with the fabric that I had on hand. There were still some costs associated to this project, and it did take about a half an hour per chair. This is the waste that I've produced for this, which would be far less than if I had discarded these 6 chairs and just bought new ones. The fabric was about $10 a yard. It was down from $100 a yard, so I feel like that was a really good buy. It was leftover from a previous project, and I used maybe 4 yards if I'm approximating. So it's about $40 for the fabric, about $10 for the retainer clips, about $5 for staples, the staple gun I borrowed. So in total, we're looking at about less than $10 per chair, and these chairs retail for about $24 new. I hope this was beneficial for you. I hope that you seen the retainer clips and how to deal with those was helpful, because I know that it would have been far easier just to use a screwdriver to remove the screws, but this did take a little bit of figuring out. I really love the way that they turned out in the end. You can find links to the materials that I use down in the description box below. And if you'd like to see other home projects that we're doing, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.